the American Spirit March.
From every area liberated by the armies of the United Nations, new evidence is reaching us of crimes and atrocities committed by the Nazis. A great many Germans know about these crimes. Those who do not know because they do not want to know. They do not ask questions because they are afraid of the answers. They fear the knowledge of what they have tolerated. But the civilized world has means to differentiate between criminals and their victims. These means are deeds. Men will have to prove by deeds where they stood and where they stand. Mere words will not be believed by a world that has witnessed the crimes which the Nazis have committed.
I was a young assistant to a judge at the tribunal in Berlin. And on the 1st of April 1933, the famous boycott day, when Hitler sent the SS and the SR in the streets, and they watched every Jewish shop, every office of a Jewish lawyer, every office of a Jewish doctor. They were posted there, and there are demonstrations in the streets. On that day, I was suspended in my official position. As a matter of fact, my family, which consisted of 5 people, with the exception of my mother, everybody was thrown out or suspended. My father was a lawyer, he was suspended as a lawyer. My elder sister was a teacher at the college, was suspended as a teacher at the college. I was an assistant to a judge, I was suspended as an assistant to the judge. My younger sister was in school and was thrown out from the school. If that happens to a family, you understand that something very dramatic is developed.
Some people just let everything, business, apartment, and they try to get out. Some people were struggling, and some people believed, a lot of them, there's going to be a change. It's going to be different. These things will be modified. But we was told from Nazis, if you think that there's going to be any change for the better, forget it. It's going to be the change for worse.
They came thousands and thousands to the American Council. They came to every country which was a little bit free. They came running and said, give me a visa, give me a visa.
They should have taken more in. They could have saved thousands of lives, but they didn't open the door for them. That's what I'm saying. I'm glad to be here, and I'm thankful I'm here.
Sure.
But none of my family came out because America didn't open the doors for us.
President Roosevelt was interested in trying to do something for the refugees. And when the Germans created the Anschluss, he felt there was an opportunity to tell the world that we were going to try to do something for the victims of the Nazi persecution.
There was the Avian Conference, which Roosevelt called,
It was one of the most tragic experiences of my long life. I was there. There was a Jewish delegation of 3 people, Golda Meir, I, and Dr. Weizmann. I was the main spokesman. There were about 20 governments. There were all the great churches. There were all the international organizations. Not one of them was ready to take in 1,000 Jews.
Did you think Roosevelt was sincere?
Well, I don't know. I certainly thought that he was sincere, but he was probably incapable to make any major gesture. And if America couldn't make such a gesture, you couldn't expect it from the other countries.
Well, Robert Pell was at the Evian conference, which occurred in the late 30s in France, where they were discussing this question of the maltreatment of the Jews in Germany and what could be done about it. And partly perhaps as a result of that conference, Robert took the lead in establishing the Jewish settlement in the Dominican Republic.
The Dominican Republic, about the size of Holland and Belgium, with a population of about 1.5 million, has opened its heart to the homeless people of a troubled Europe. Spokesman for the U.S. State Department was the Honorable Robert T. Pell.
The government of the United States of America is proud to be associated in a tribute to the Dominican people, whose generous attitude has made possible settlement of many hundreds of European refugees on this hospitable soil.
Trujillo was concerned about correcting the balance in his population between whites and blacks. And he knew all the refugees would be white.
He offered 100,000 Jews to come into San Domingo, but this was, of course, a gesture which was to be foreseen, would not have been picked up because people were not the infrastructure for really large settlements in this country, and a few thousand Jews came to social work, and their life was saved. I'm not saying anything about the importance of even such a gesture.
The Zionists were ideologically, which means emotionally, psychologically, unprepared for such an emergency of having to rescue not individuals, not small groups, not pioneers, but to rescue hundreds of thousands, millions of people. They were just not prepared. And actually, they used to say, rescue is not our business.
Sosua, New World Shelter for Refugees. Sosua, haven in the Caribbean.
Well, I went to Shanghai.
Right, now how come you had to go to Shanghai?
The Americans didn't let me come in, as simple as that. It just didn't work very well. It was very difficult to immigrate here. My affidavit was gone. I waited a year. Shanghai had the doors open, so I took the best chance to get out.
I received an affidavit in 1938, and then I discovered I had not registered with the American consulate. Now, the registration numbers were very high because there was only a certain quota. So there was no chance for me to wait because my number didn't come until 1941. In the meantime, in 1939, I went to England on a domestic permit.
London. Scenes in this picture are taken from Brunsbury Park, but similar ones are taking place in many parts of the country. The children are part of the Jewish refugee influx, which is providing the world with such a ticklish problem. Not all of them know where their parents are. They write letters, which will in many cases never be delivered. But meanwhile, these arrangements for the kiddies keep them fed and as happy as possible under circumstances which all people of understanding and sympathy must surely deplore.
there should have been a crisis, but there wasn't enough passion in the United States to have the refugees come in. It was horrible. Ship came from Hamburg, I believe it was, to Cuba. The Cubans wouldn't let them in. They came up to America. America wouldn't let them in, and the ship was sent back to Hamburg for the people there to be burnt. The horrible thought is that at the time of the Holocaust in Europe, the Western European nations and the United States and many other nations would not change their immigration laws one jot, one iota. And what Hitler was seeking to do, certainly in the beginning stages, was not to kill the Jews, but to have them removed from Germany. But nobody would accept them.
I think basically it was an economic fear of numbers. After all, how many could you admit, or would you admit? The number pressing for admission is very high. Roosevelt was thinking of the problem as in terms of 10 million.
And what were the long-range plans?
Well, I'm not sure that there were any.
Roosevelt may have wanted to increase the quota, but there would have been great resistance in the Congress. And he wasn't courageous enough on this issue to fight the Congress.
Why not?
Because a president has to take care of public opinion. Why not? If you have a majority in Congress against you, you can't put things through.
There were a number of prominent Jewish congressmen, like Saul Bloom of the west side of New York. He never raised his voice in support of efforts for refugees.
The Zionists didn't like Jews per se. They considered the masses of the Jews, the millions of the Jews, as parasites, as unproductive elements, as people who are behaving in embarrassing ways. They wanted a new type of Jews. Weizmann said that only a minority, only a remnant can be saved. The others, 4 million, he said, are like dust, and they will be spread by the cruel winds of history, and there is nothing one can do about it. We can only sympathize.
You know, the United Nations, at that time League of Nations, established a High Commission for German refugees. MacDonald was the High Commissioner, was later the first American ambassador in Israel, a good friend of mine. I was a member of the executive board. They couldn't get any country to admit more than a few hundred Jews in the best case, and all they did was always pressure the Jewish agency to admit more German Jews to Palestine, because we had a quota, and we had to distribute to various countries.
We planned an organized exodus to Palestine, illegal from the point of view of the British, who used to issue every year what they used to call a schedule, a number of certificates for immigrants. The number was very limited. And then they decided to stop immigration altogether, and this was on the very eve of the outbreak of the war, the famous white paper in 1939.
On September the 1st, 1939, the Nazi army smashed into Poland.
They told us in advance. Hitler made a number of speeches, and Göring made speeches, and Goebbels made speeches. On the 30th of January, the day of what they called the Machtergreifung, when they took power, they announced at several of these speeches, if This war will end, it will not end with the defeat of the German people, but it will be the end of the Jewish race in view. When the German armies marched in, thousands of Jews, thousands of non-Jews were individually killed, were shot, this is all documented was all documented in white books and yellow books and other publications by the Allies.
We had to emphasize that there is a Jewish war problem. And we initiated the program to create a Jewish army. We didn't succeed because we were attacked.
Who attacked?
All the Jewish organizations.
On April 9, 1940, the leaders of Nazi Germany shifted their war machine into high gear. They overran into Denmark. They smashed into Norway. On May the 10th, 1940, they blitzed into Holland and Belgium.
During the retreat in June 1940, the Germans were all around our unit. We were all volunteers in the French army of either German or Italian origin, in fact, nationality. We had still German and Italian papers. We were not naturalized. So in case we were going to be taken prisoners by the Germans, we would have been shot as deserters. So we prevailed upon our lieutenant to issue us identities in French identities that we made up overnight. Literally during one night, we sat together and hammered out on a typewriter this little document here, which is an excerpt of the military passbook that has been lost during the campaign, and there we entered then these fictitious nationalities. I then was able to move about in unoccupied France with relative freedom, and that was one part, I think, of the attraction that I held also for Wehr and Frey, because most people did not have that kind of a perfect false identity.
The idea was to save as many of the outstanding leaders, many political, others economic or scientific, but men who really had a valuable contribution to make to the world, to save as many of those as possible.
First we worked just out of the hotel room of Fry's, but very soon it became obvious that we had to get an office, and we got an office in somewhere downtown Marseille, and word spread like wildfire and so on, and very soon there were lines forming outside in the street and for a block long. I was lucky because I was in the French army, I had volunteered for the French army, so I was not in a camp during that period, but many were in camps, and we're still in camps. We tried, some of the more prominent people, we had tried to get out of camps, including Feuchtwanger, for instance, and others. Our job was precisely, that was one of the more disagreeable jobs, was to pick and choose among these many people who came and asked for some help.
I think that was responsible for solving the problem for at least 1,500 people.
Perhaps one tragic aspect of the story is that precisely that there was a great deal was accomplished, and we were all very proud of what we accomplished, and perhaps everybody was so proud that they forgot about all the others. Looking back on the episode, that is perhaps to some extent at least, the price that we paid for getting out these few.
There has been a quota system. Without quota, you couldn't come in, except you had a senator on pay at least $500, he get you in. To that time, I know it. I can prove it.
When I came 1940 to America, I lived before in Geneva, I was representing the Jewish Agency for Palestine in America. I was the only member of the executive. And I was supposed to represent them, especially in Washington. So I brought my family over to New York, where I had an apartment, and I established an office in Washington, where I had also an apartment. 3 days a week I spent in Washington, and 4 days a week with my family. And I established very close relations, especially through the help of Stephen Wise. Now, I spent every week 1 or 2 days in the State Department. Most of them, I wouldn't say were anti-Semites, but great bureaucrats who were dead against increasing the quota.
They were afraid that the refugees would be fifth columnists, in other words, spies.
No longer can the Nazis and fascists in this country masquerade as patriots or the communists as liberals. For us, there can be but one policy: keep America out of Europe and Europe out of America.
I spoke to Roosevelt about it, and others spoke to Roosevelt about it, but he said, get the Congress a majority, and I'll do it gladly.
And what did Wise say to that? Could he get a majority?
No.
Why not?
Because the whole state of mind of America was at that time isolationist and anti-war and anti-refugees, bureaucratic. We don't want to have these European Jews.
Today's threat to our national security is not a matter of military weapons alone. We know of new methods of attack. The Trojan horse, the fifth column that betrays a nation unprepared for treachery. Spies, saboteurs, and traitors are the actors in this new strategy. These dividing forces are undiluted poison. They must not be allowed to spread in the new world as they have in the old.
I only recall one refugee whom the President's Advisory Committee got in from Czechoslovakia. And when the war was over and he returned to Czechoslovakia, he turned out to be a communist. In other words, he would have been what they called a fifth columnist.
On June the 22nd, 1941, the success-crazy Nazis took their longest step toward world conquest. Without any declaration of war, they blitzed into Russia.
I hate to say this, President Roosevelt, and I say this despite the fact that I still deem him a great president, and that I want to denigrate him. Nonetheless, he felt that trying to help the Jews at that time and thereafter would make him subject to the charge of Jew deal.
The evil mastermind of aggression is forced into the open. The world's #1 arsonist and killer declares the war on the United States, and his stooges applaud. The president bought the first defense bond and set an early example for us all. Let's get behind our Army, our Navy, and our president.
Fellow Americans, I ask you to demonstrate again your faith in America.
For us, that was the great alternative. And if we didn't have faith in that alternative, in what could we have faith? I had, even in the war years, I had a photo of Roosevelt, a picture of him, which the American consul gave me for years. I had it on my wall.
The Allied governments, Great Britain, and later when the United States entered the war, they ignored this war aim of the Nazis, and they tried by every means possible, consistently, persistently, to act as if the Jews were not singled out as a special category for destruction.
Goebbels says we don't want the Jews. Apparently the nations don't want the Jews. Let's kill the Jews. Let's make Germany Judenrein.
The first bit of information was received as early as August of 1942 from the Secretary of the World Jewish Congress in Switzerland, who reported that Hitler had under consideration a plan to exterminate all Jews in German-controlled Europe.
The man who had brought the message was a very reliable man, and he had brought other messages before who had proved absolutely accurate. So I said to the Americans and to the British, please inform your government of this message. Please verify this message through your own secret services. After all, you have secret services, I do not have it. And number three, please give the following message to Dr. Stephen Wise.
And by November of '42, sufficient information had been received that Sumner Wells authorized the Jewish organizations to make this public.
The first story, the 2 million Jews were massacred, I read one horrible, probably the most horrible morning of my life in Washington in November of 1942, and buried in the 8th or 10th page of the Washington Post. I remember it was on the left side of the page, on a little story, maybe the headline of about 3-4 inches, saying Rabbi Wise says 2 million Jews slain. And this newspaper story changed my life, because I instinctively reacted. I said, this is the overwhelming thing that's happening in the world today that's dominating my life. In fact, I couldn't go on with what I was doing. I was the director of a committee for a Jewish army, which was, after all, very close to these issues. And I couldn't go on and keep an appointment that day with a congressman to talk about committee for a Jewish army, because it seemed futile.
I don't know whether you ever met Wise or you've seen him. Wonderful human being. He was deeply concerned. And you read some of the letters written during that period, you would see he wrote a letter to Justice Frankfurter, he wrote a letter to one of his friends who was a Protestant minister, where he writes he cannot sleep, he cannot forget, he has a terrible news and he doesn't know what to do.
If Rabbi Wise, when he had that press conference the day before, about which I read in the paper, would have fainted right there, or would have torn his clothes, and would have called a meeting the next day of all the leadership of the Jews, and said, what are we going to do, and declared a real emergency. I have no doubt they would have convinced the American government that it has to become a task of America's war aim. One of America's war aims would be to counter this German war aim of killing the Jews, and becomes Americans' purpose to save the Jews. I don't think this was a difficult notion to put across. But he didn't do that. He just said some very innocuous words and reacted normally, and then everybody went on his business as usual. Therefore, without justifying and condoning Roosevelt, I must start by saying that in all decency, human decency, one has to ask, what did the Jewish leaders do to shake Roosevelt?
My friend Stephen Wise was in opposition to the so-called establishment, which was mostly composed of rich and influential Jews. Especially the American Jewish Committee, the American Joint Distribution Committee, and others. Wise was always a fighter for democracy in Jewish life, established the American Jewish Congress. He really established the world, he got me to establish the World Jewish Congress. But he had personally very good contacts in Washington.
The first thing I did is run to see Assistant Secretary of State Adolph Burley. It was from a conference with him that Wise came out when he announced the massacre, which I saw in the paper. And he confirmed this to me. As a matter of fact, he even said that they had been urging Wise to announce it a few weeks earlier. And I said, what are you going to do about it? Which I think, Larry, is a normal human reaction. I mean, when you hear of a thing like this, what are you going to do? And he says, what can we do? I say, surely there's something you can do. I said, I don't know what I can do. I'm telling you, Mr. Secretary, I'm going to do something. I mean, I'm going to do everything I can. I mean, from now on, that's all I'm going to do, is try and save the Jews. You know, and then, you know, this and that, and I felt, I mean, if I want to do something to save the Jews, I shouldn't make an enemy of an Assistant Secretary of State. So I apologized, and I thanked him for his kindness and so forth, and I left. And I went straight to the first phone I could reach and called Marilyn in New York, who was my right-hand man in those days, and called a meeting that night of all the active people in the Committee for Jewish Army, and I made a speech there, which was published someplace in the Answer magazine, in which I said that from now on, we get up in the morning, we work all day, and go to bed at night, only with one subject, and this is how to save the Jews. Now, if this would have been the attitude by 10% of the Jewish leadership in this country, many more, for every percent of Jewish leaders who would have thought so X% of Jews would have been saved. But there weren't any.
Roosevelt was totally immersed in the war, and it was a tremendous thing, and he was deeply involved in it. The refugee problem tended to be regarded as a distraction from the war.
They knew the Jews were being killed, you know, but the grasp wasn't there. Now, the people who should have dramatized, shook up, awakened the otherwise busy, like Ben Hecht's ballad yesterday we looked at, the world is busy with other news. The otherwise unrealizing world leadership of what's going on should have been the Jewish leaders.
In reality, Hitler's propaganda had affected a great part of the free world too. Certainly during the first years of the war, everybody was anxious not to be accused that they were conducting the war of the Jews.
Who will say it's a Jewish war? Hitler. Hitler was screaming his propaganda it's a Jewish war, so what? So the Allies didn't go to war for it. He was screaming it's a Jewish war because they went to war.
His real name was Bergson, but he was the nephew of the famous former chief rabbi of Israel, a great Jewish Talmudist and mystic, Rav Kook. And so he changed, he had a pen named Hillel Kook. He established a committee and got senators to help him. Ben Hecht, they won over, and another group of intellectuals, and this they were effective, and they did generally a very good job. They got the attention of American public opinion to the tragedy of the Jews.
I mean, wasn't he in the war? Wasn't it one war? Or what was Hitler's war against the Jews something outside, or the Jews are outside of the pale of humanity? And this is precisely the core of the issue, Larry. That if you want to know what was the difference, is that we reacted on an assumption that the Jew is an equal human being and that he has an identity of his own, that the whole years prior to the extermination were possible because the Jews of England and France and America weren't interested in raising the sharpness, the question, what's happening to the Jews of Germany, because the unity of the Jews was phony.
Stephen Weiss tried his best. He had influence on Roosevelt, but not enough to get him to oppose the majority in the Congress.
People were being drafted into the army, and people didn't think that they were drafted to go on rescue missions. They were drafted to fight the war.
Germany made it a war aim to exterminate the Jews. It was not a mob of screaming pogrom people keep raping women and killing children in a basement like in Russia. You know. It was a decided, planned governmental action in the middle of a war in which the Germans were using military personnel to do it. And therefore, only a war machine of the Allies could stop it. It was its duty to stop it. It was also its logic to stop it. I mean, when in a war, whenever the enemy wants to take this hill, the other side prevents him from taking the hill. The very fact that the Germans wanted to do it was enough reason for the Allies to stop them from doing it, leave alone humanitarian concerns. And I don't slight humanitarian concerns.
Americans, fighting for their country while half a world away from it, fighting for their country and for more than their country, fighting for an idea. The idea bigger than the country. Without the idea, the country might have remained only a wilderness. Without the country, the idea might have remained only a dream.
Harold Ickes, the Secretary of Interior of the United States, was honorary chairman of the Emergency Committee to Save the Jewish People of Europe, which we eventually established in Washington. But you wouldn't give us one important Jew who joined our committee. One didn't rebel against the establishment and said, these people have an emergency committee to save the Jewish people of Europe. You know, we joined.
To say that the Zionists or other Jewish organizations did nothing is incorrect. They have done hundreds of things, but they have done it first under pressure of their own constituencies, indicating our activities, asking them why don't they do it, and there was a spirit of near rebellion against the official leadership of the Zionists and the Jewish organizations.
They protested naturally, mass meetings, I spoke often in Madison Square Garden and so on, but with these normal methods of pressure, you don't influence Hitler.
When the Jewish Agency, the world leadership of the World Zionist Organization, has called in the editors of the Hebrew press in Palestine when they first got the news and asked them voluntarily to put a censorship and not publish, and for months the Jews of Palestine didn't know there was a massacre when it was making all the front pages in the United States. And by the way, it took some Jews to put it on the front pages, and it was us, a few Palestinians who happened to be here. We got to nearly everybody. When we brought the pageant, We Shall Never Die, the Ben Hecht pageant, which was a very effective, tremendous piece of propaganda. We did it in Madison Square Garden twice, and we brought it to Constitution Hall in Washington to an invited audience, which included hundreds of congressmen and senators, Supreme Court, 4 Supreme Court justices, Mrs. Roosevelt, most of the diplomatic corps, 90% of it, maybe more even, except the British embassy didn't come, and Roosevelt didn't come. And we jumped in, trying to do whatever we can to mobilize governmental action.
And I fought them because they were very anti-government in America. They encouraged the opposition with accusing Roosevelt and so on that they betrayed the Jewish people.
I was in those days as much a Zionist as Rabbi Weiss, I mean, at least to my knowledge. And it was actually in those days that I ceased being a Zionist because the fact that the Zionist leadership did not grasp the paramount responsibility of what's happening made me question the whole thing. And I arrived at a decision that the question of identity of the victims, that the Jewish unity didn't hold. That when 10,000 Jews a day were being killed in Europe, the Jews of Palestine and the Jews of America and the Jews of England were living their lives because you had an abstract notion of Jewish unity, which is important spiritually, which is important religiously, which is important in normal days, but we didn't withstand the test of war and extermination.
You were in the Warsaw Ghetto?
Yes. I was, yes, all the time.
And you said you were in the uprising?
Yes, I was in the uprising, yeah,
and that nobody would help?
No, nobody would help, no. It was the uprising, they was fighting like heroes. And they didn't have chance because they didn't have weapons. They was using the Molotov cocktails, they call that. And 300,000 Jews died.
These pictures, filmed by the underground and smuggled to their government in exile in London, are the first scenes to be shown of the Warsaw Uprising. The Germans systematically reduced the Warsaw Ghetto to rubble, exterminating uncounted thousands.
Every day we had radio with England, but no help. The help was only after the war. And of course, all my family I lost in ghetto.
The only limit on Roosevelt's effort was what to do next. I think he tried everything that anyone could suggest to him.
The Bermuda Conference, an instrument of deception to give the impression, public opinion, that something is done.
They wanted simply a statement made that they were very sad about the massacres of the Jews, but they were also pleased that no positive action had been taken.
But Roosevelt would have gladly helped Jews and fought Hitler more politically and then militarily if the majority of public opinion in America wasn't dead against it. And he is a very smart politician, doesn't want necessarily to antagonize too much the majority.
We ran hundreds of ads, as you know, and we got responses from many non-Jews. I used to get livid, and I still get very annoyed when people tell me that you couldn't do anything because there was anti-Semitism in America. I mean, this is such ridiculous garbage, forgive me. I mean, that today people aren't ashamed. Today, in 1978, people will give you this as an excuse, not realizing that in the whole history of the United States, one Jew was not killed because of anti-Semitism. In effect, what they are saying is because we were afraid that they won't admit us into the Harvard Club, they let 10,000 Jews a day in Europe get killed.
Congressman Saul Bloom had been selected as a delegate to both conferences. He was more or less one of those who always hung on the coattails of the State Department. He liked to attend the state dinners, and he liked the diplomacy that the State Department could accord him. When he went to Evian, when he went to Bermuda, he may have had pretty good declarations that he was going to do something worthwhile, but he came back empty-handed. He did nothing.
During the war, anyhow, very much couldn't be done except the bombing of the camps. And where the Americans were not, in my opinion, the one who prevented by the British. And I don't think the Americans would have gone into a conflict with the British. It was difficult enough to maintain the solidarity of the Allies.
If the premise of our opponents was that everything is lost anyhow, the logical conclusion was, why try?
I made suggestions for the rescue of Romanian Jews and for French Jews. There was a particular scheme which was suggested by the Jewish community of Romania and which reached me through the intermediary of the International Committee of the Red Cross. And where they asked for financial help.
I was the head of the Foreign Funds Control at that time in the Treasury Department. And the government had a rather absolute policy against any private persons communicating with enemy territory.
The Treasury worked out a plan whereby we would block the dollars in the United States, and foreign currency could be borrowed against that and used to bribe to get these Jews out. So the Germans wouldn't be getting the dollars, it wouldn't benefit the Germans. Well, the State Department opposed that plan from beginning to end. We had meeting after meeting.
And nothing happened. And months would go by, and we would inquire why the license hadn't been issued. And nothing happened. That was the beginning of the Treasury's interest in the problem of refugees.
In the meantime, we had strenuous objections from the British as well as from our State Department colleagues. The British position was summed up in a cable which said that they were opposed to the rescue of these Jews, and I'll quote exactly, because of, quote, the difficulties of disposing of any considerable number of Jews should they be rescued.
Could many, maybe even most of the surviving Jews of Europe, of the Jews who were alive in Europe in November 42 been saved? In my opinion, definitely yes.
How?
It's a heartbreaking statement to make, but and it haunts me, but this is my conviction. And I wish I didn't have it, but I've re-examined it, and unfortunately it holds. How, very simply, you see, if let's take fantasy and let's take reality. Fantasy is if the same kind of reaction that my colleagues from Palestine and the American friends who worked with us in the Committee for the Jewish Army, if they had the same reaction that we had.
For instance, they had once advertisements that every man, American Jew, will send $1,000, will save a Romanian Jewish child. It was plain nonsense. They couldn't save with money Romanian Jewish child, but they want to get money for their agitation.
These were some of the most difficult months and years in my life. To see and to wait, and I must say even, you know, the beauty of the landscape in Switzerland, and I was having an office and looking out on the lake and out on the beautiful mountains, the Mont Blanc. And all around the world was going to pieces, and there you had this peace and this nice atmosphere, and nothing comes, and you couldn't really impress the outside world what the tragedy was.
What would have happened if they stormed the White House? They didn't storm the White House because when we organized the demonstration of 500 rabbis, we finally managed to get one courageous Orthodox Jewish rabbi, the head of Agudas Israel, the non-Zionist outfit. Because all the rabbis boycotted us when we tried to organize it. And we had a tremendously impressive march to Washington. And we got Vice President Wallace to interrupt the session of the Senate, which he presided on deliberately that day, and ask all the senators to come to the steps of Capitol Hill to receive these rabbis who arrived by special train and marched on the Capitol. After Wallace made a speech and the rabbis gave him a petition, there were tremendous papers in all the press and everywhere, all these rabbis crying. We marched on the White House, and we tried for weeks before this demonstration to have Roosevelt receive the delegation just like Wallace received them.
We pray and appeal to the Lord, blessed be He, that our most gracious President, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, consider and recognize this momentous hour of history and the responsibility which the divine presence has laid upon him, that he may save the remnant of the people of the book, the people of Israel.
And it was the Jewish advisors, as published in a memoir of Roosevelt's secretary McIntyre, who was actually the man who received us, who says that one of the Jewish advisors said, President's Jewish friend said, these are not the kind of Jews you should associate with. And they spirited him out of the White House. Officially, they told us he's out of town. What they did is that a couple of hours earlier, they took him to a base to dedicate a bomber that was flying to Tito. This is what petrified, frightened Jews can do to themselves and to the brothers.
It seems you don't know the American situation. The Congress dominates.
Senator Gillette was the leader of the Senate resolution, and Congressman Will Rogers, the son of the famous Will Rogers, even though he was famous himself, was the leader of the House resolution. We introduced two concurrent resolutions in the House and in the Senate, which called on the President to establish a special commission to save the remnants of the Jewish people. And on this, the Jewish leadership, and especially the Zionist leadership, put monkey wrenches because they said that you shouldn't say save the Jewish people, you should say save the Jewish people by opening the gates of Palestine. And we said that you're dooming them because you shouldn't say save people conditionally to what?
The reports had been coming out from Switzerland as to what was happening in Germany to the Jews, and all of a sudden they stopped. And we discovered through some friends we had in the State Department that the reason they stopped was that the State Department had instructed Mr. Harrison, who was the head of the legation in Switzerland, not to forward any more private communications to the Jewish agencies here as to what was happening.
The normal attitude of the State Department in those days, and I suspect it still exists, that you don't do anything to rock the boat. You keep things calm. And the fact that millions of Jews were being murdered while they were delaying, I don't think troubled most of them.
Do you think they knew?
Well, obviously they knew. They knew from those cables. They knew from the cable they suppressed.
We discovered that, and that really led to bringing this matter to the attention of the President.
I prepared a very lengthy memorandum entitled Report to the Secretary on the Acquiescence of this Government in the Murder of the Jews. It revealed that certain State Department officials were guilty of, one, failing to use the governmental machinery at their disposal to rescue the Jews from Hitler, and even going so far as to use this governmental machinery to prevent the rescue of the Jews. Secondly, they not only failed to cooperate with private organizations in the efforts of these organizations to work out individual programs of their own, but they took steps designed to prevent these programs from being put into effect. And they not only failed to facilitate the obtaining of information concerning Hitler's plans to exterminate the Jews, but in their official capacity, they surreptitiously attempted to stop the obtaining of the information concerning the murder of the Jewish people of Europe.
We said that saving the Jews is the highest priority. First of all, it is the highest priority for Jews. It's inconceivable that Jews should remain indifferent to the extermination of their brethren.
Weiss testified. He got Congressman Blum to have open hearings to stymie this resolution. And he came there and he testified. Naturally, he didn't say that it's bad to have such an agency. He said it's not enough. Well, if you say it's not enough, then it isn't good. Why should American congressmen do it if Rabbi Weiss didn't? By the way, he didn't convince them. He managed to convince Blum to pigeonhole it. It never came up for a vote in the House. But it passed unanimously in the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. You know, even though once the House started hearings, the Senate was supposed to wait for it, except that, and we couldn't get the chairman, Tom Connolly, to take it up. And then one day we waited until one day he was sick. He was an old man. And the acting chairman was Senator Thomas Afuto, who was an intellectual Mormon religious man. And as a religious man, he planned it all. He's the man who told me, wait until one day I'll preside and have it passed unanimously, and he did. He says there's no opposition to this resolution. To the contrary, we all feel it should be done. And it passed.
And that report was presented to the Secretary of the Treasury, who presented it to President Roosevelt. And I know that Secretary Morgenthau, not too long before he died, told me that that was the most shocking thing that had ever come to his attention during the time that he had served in government service. And apparently it was shocking enough to President Roosevelt that it led to the formation of the War Refugee Board.
Only when the matter was brought to the President's attention forcibly in early 1944 did the President react, but when he reacted, he went all the way.
John Paley, who of course was at that point made the director, ran this whole show, recruited his own men, many from his, in fact, most from the Treasury Department.
The mere signing of the executive order involved a complete change in American policy, because up to then, the attitude was that we had to get on with the war and we shouldn't get into problems like this. But the President in his executive order said it's now the policy of the United States government to do everything possible consistent with the war effort to aid people who were being persecuted in occupied enemy territory.
Jews could have been saved because it was possible to convince the Allies, especially the American government, that they should accept it as a principle. They should establish a special commission to save the Jews, not the War Refugee Board, because Hitler wasn't massacring refugees, he was massacring Jews. And they should have done it a year earlier. Because the War Refugee Board was established late December 43, it was in 44 actually.
It reached a point where, as a result of so many of our battles with the State Department, I was at one point told that by, again, this same friend of mine in the State Department told me that another person in the State Department said that this Jew Morgenthau and his Jewish assistant Du Bois are trying to run the State Department. It just so happens I'm not Jewish.
The Jewish organizations, one of the reasons that they were so much against us is that we raised too much noise.
They didn't make noise?
They say it is embarrassing. It creates anti-Semitism to put the Jews, the word Jew, the slogan Jew, on the front page of newspapers, or to advertise it on in full-page advertising.
So they played down, they hushed up the issue, and this was the real reason of what was happening during the years of the massacre in the United States. I showed you yesterday in this document from the State Department in which Dr. Goldman has been pressuring them to get me deported, to get me as if I was the problem, not Hitler. And in fact, then he quotes Weiss saying that I'm as bad as Hitler. And he was asked why, obviously, you know, he went on, he said, because Hitler brought anti-Semitism to Europe and I'm bringing it to America.
Being the head of a War Refugee Board and knowing it was late in the war, knowing there wasn't too much we could do, was a very disturbing experience. You found yourself sort of sick to your stomach most of the time. And you had great pressure from private groups, very understandable pressure. Sometimes the private groups didn't get along too well either. Our best cooperation, I think, came from the JDC, the Jewish Joint Distribution Committee.
And they came and they said, don't worry about any allocations. We will take care of all the money you need. And this was actually the end of the great possibilities of the War Refugee Board.
This was an all-out war, and the whole economy, the whole country was devoted to winning this war. And we had to work within those confines. We couldn't say we're going to drop the war effort and start a rescue operation. But there were many things that could be done. And we could provide facilities to the private agencies. We could let them send money in through Switzerland in ways that didn't give any foreign exchange to the Germans.
The problem of dealing with the rescue of hundreds of thousands of Jews can be only feasible if it is done by governments which have at their disposal great amounts of money.
If we would have stopped the debt machine, the debt factories, and made it a retail murder, they couldn't have murdered so many millions of people. They murdered it because they made it efficient, because they used poison gas, because they used assembly lines which were never interfered with.
At the center of all of our attention on the War Refugee Board side and that of the relief, the Jewish organizations, was this massive, rapid rounding up and deportation of the Hungarian Jews, an exercise that was directed by the infamous Eichmann, and which succeeded in decimating a Jewish community of, what was it, 600,000 or 800,000 people within a space of about 3 months. People were being deported at a rhythm of 12,000 a day out of Hungary north to Auschwitz. In that connection, since this terrible installation was working night and day. The suggestion was made, and I think for the first time to me, by Dr. Sternbuch, the Union of Orthodox Rabbis, and possibly Gerhard Riegner, who was familiar with the original report, that an effort might be made to bomb the rail lines leading to Auschwitz as one means of at least temporarily halting this massive deportation of Jews from Hungary. Once that recommendation had been sent to Washington, it was pretty well out of my hand.
At the time it was first raised that we should get the Air Force to bomb Auschwitz. The War Refugee Board staff itself was very leery of this. There'd be bound to be loss of life connected with it. Could we ask American flyers to do this? We worried about the effect on even on the Germans of our action if we wiped out a lot of the people we were trying to save. And so initially we were not at all enthusiastic about this.
This is the cause of saving human life that anybody who thinks it through, I think, would want to be a part of the action. I felt that way. When the Germans were stepping up their extermination programs, the people in the Polish government kept us continually advised on that, what they were doing. And the Polish government felt that Auschwitz should be bombed. I thought about that very carefully and sent a cable to Washington with that recommendation. That had been brought up several times before. However, the cable that I sent sort of raised the matter again. I thought it made sense to bomb these camps.
Later, when the extent of what was going on in the exterminating the Jews became clearer, we did press it with the War Department. And the War Department told us it wasn't operationally feasible, that we didn't have planes that could accompany bombers all the way from England to Auschwitz and return. And there was bound to be a large loss of life, and they weren't willing to do it.
John McCloy was later High Commissioner in Germany, later President of the Chase Bank, a good friend of mine. I talked to McCloy only 2-3 years ago about it, and he confirmed my impression that the main responsible for not doing it was the English High Command. Anyhow, this wasn't done.
And later you found out?
Later, apparently, it has come to light that there were bombing raids going on from Italy, bases in Italy, to areas very close to Auschwitz. So perhaps it could have been bombed.
The revelation of German atrocities in Poland, Norway, France, and Belgium, and the fully authenticated evidence of mass killings leaves the American people horror-stricken. We cannot help but gasp at the mass exterminations carried out over a 3-year period in Lublin. We subscribe to our government's determination that Germany be held responsible for any reprisals against the Polish Home Army in Warsaw. We of the American Legion have been particularly shocked by the Grenoble atrocities, the Nazis' planned mutilation of men, women, and children, the unwarranted execution of civilians, as well as members of the French forces of the interior. The crimes of the Nazis have been unspeakable. With the increased pace of Allied victories, the day of reckoning is near, and every German realizes that the Allies will come marching into Berlin with the crimes of Lublin, Grenoble, and Lüderitz, as well as those which occurred in other cities, towns and villages overrun by the Hun, vivid in every soldier's mind.
How could you have stopped that?
Well, there's this famous business of bombing the railroads continuously, and this wasn't done, but this would have slowed it, but not meaningfully. The one concrete solution was made in by us in telegrams early in '44, I believe. The Allies warned Germany that if they will use poison gas on any place against any people, the Allies will retaliate and kite upon Germany any place they'll choose. And this was done after it was known that they have killed more than 1 million Jews by poison gas, maybe 2 million. So immediately we sent telegrams to Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin, and pressure. There was already a War Refugee Board, pressure the War Refugee Board that they should issue another statement amplifying it and including the Jews and warning them that if you don't, since it's known that you're using gas to kill Jews, if you're not going to stop it, we'll use gas against you. That is a pretty serious step. Granted. And I made it later on in a speech as chairman of the Hebrew Committee of National Liberation in Town Hall, which was broadcast on the radio, and everybody got a shudder. They thought I was too irresponsible. There was no comment. They thought it's such a frightening proposition. And I'm asking you again the question, why did the Allies threaten the Germans to use poison gas against them if they use it against Greek farmers or Polish officers or Norwegian seamen and not against Jews? Why was it so outrageous to say that you should use poison gas if you kill Jews? I say it was a crime that they didn't do it. Because this was encouragement. And we said so. We had a phrase, we said, to the criminal Nazi mind, this is encouragement. And this was encouragement.
While I was in New York preparing to go to Turkey, I met a number of Jewish leaders. And I was put on to the former Romanian ambassador of the United States. He had defected from Romania and stayed in the United States as a result of Hitler taking over Romania. He gave me a letter to his friend Alexander Cristiano, who was ambassador to Turkey. And he said, you tell my friend Cristiano he better get out of there. The Germans are going to lose and he's going to get trapped and killed. And we sat in a small room and each took out pencils. And he was a very dapper, good-looking man, spoke perfect English, and talked about nothing for some time, getting nowhere. And I suddenly, in a rather undiplomatic way, turned around and said, Mr. Ambassador, you're going to get killed, you and your family. He looked startled. I said, there are military reports, which you must have also indicate that the Russians are on their way to Bessarabia, and the first thing he'll do is get hold of you and Antonescu, the head of the Romanian government, and they will take over Romania. And he said, well, so what? I said, well, there's a way of your being saved. And he said, if there is a camp in Transnistria which is incarcerating about 100,000 Jews are left. They're dying at the rate of 100,000 a day. All you do is open that camp, and I will arrange to get you and your family a visa to the United States.
We could see that the Germans were warned repeatedly that the crimes against the Jews wouldn't be forgotten after the war. And this became more important and more effective as the war drew to a close, and even the Germans could see they were going to lose.
On Monday, Simon came rushing to me in the embassy to say he's back, he has seen Antonescu, and he's ready to make the deal, which was shocking to me because I had no authority. I was just talking out of my head.
Earlier in the game, when they thought they could conquer the world, they wouldn't pay too much attention to warnings, but at this point, the warnings tended to strike home.
The 100,000 were released. Many thousands did manage to come through on the little boats to Istanbul and then transported to what was then Palestine.
I would like to know whether it would be possible, like they did America, which that large, big, huge country. It's one of the largest and most huge country in the world. Why couldn't they do the same thing in turn, let's say 100,000, 200,000, intern them over here, like we were interned in Switzerland?
I made the recommendation to John Pell, who passed it on to Secretary Morgenthau, that it would be better to treat the Jews as prisoners of war than to let them die. And I suggested that we set up prisoner of war camps in the United States, in which we could bring these people and keep them there and then send them back then, if you want, after the war is over. Meantime, treat them as prisoners of war. I prepared a memorandum on that. Secretary Morgenthau took the idea to President Roosevelt, who magnanimously, I say that with some sarcasm, agreed to set up such a haven in the United States. And he picked out an army camp, an abandoned army camp in Oswego, which would take 1,000 persons. And that was the result of that program. We did receive 1,000 people. But to me, although it had a psychological impact, it was far, far below what this government should have done. There's no reason why we shouldn't have been made an offer to, we'll house anybody here you're willing to let out.
We signed a paper. We had to go back from where we came from. That was Naples, right?
Where were you staying?
In Oswego. That was formerly army camp. That was evacuated for us and renovated. It was a very nice camp, but we had only 6 hours daily. We could go out of the town, you know. We were always under police protection. So really we were interned. It was a 10-foot wire around the camp. We couldn't go out without a permission. Mrs. Roosevelt, after 2-3 months we were in that camp, she visited us. And she told us about the whole story about the Congress and Senate, and said we are political playboy. You call that playboy? Football.
Why did people like you help?
Well, as I say, I felt it was my duty to help in something like this.
What about the people who didn't feel it was their duty?
Well, I can't speak for them. There's some people who apparently just had no feelings at all for something like this. I don't know why. I can't answer that question.
I had been urged not to come. Everybody around me in my work as vice president of Bloomingdale's and my family and all said, you're crazy to go to Turkey. What can you do against all the enemy in the middle of the war? What can one man do? And at that point, I made a little note in my diary which said, never indulge in hesitant mercy.
Most dreadful of all the camps was at Buchenwald, where only 20,000 of the original 80,000 were found alive. This murder weapon accounted for hundreds of deaths and the disfigurement of thousands of others. Of the quarter of the prison population left alive when rescued by the Americans, thousands were beyond human aid. Easy death was the most that life could offer them. Slave laborers worked on the V-2 bomb, serial numbers tattooed on their stomachs. 6 furnaces, each holding 3 bodies, were used in cremating the dead and often the living. Don't turn away, look. Burned alive. Horror unbelievable, yet true.
While in the United States on one of my return trips, I came back and forth several times from Ankara to report to the State Department. And also I was trying, I felt I should get back to my business. This is 1944, and I had left the vice presidency of Bloomingdale's, but they kept, Morgenthau and Secretary Hall kept saying, no, you got to go back, you're doing fine, so forth. And while there, I suddenly got a message that I was once to be prepared to fly off back to Istanbul the next day. I was escorted into the president's office very briefly, and he said, they had told me beforehand, the boys in Paley's office, and they were in Paley's entourage, his group of young vital assistants, said, look, 2 agents, German agents, have gone to Istanbul from Eichmann with a deal for trucks and money in exchange for Jewish lives.
The Germans have shown from the very day they came to power till the very last day that they are willing to do business as far as releasing the Jews are concerned, as far as stopping the slaughter.
I had him in some apartment house overlooking the Nile, and I talked with Brandt for hours. And one of the things Brandt said to me that I thought was significant, I said, well, we can't do anything about trucks. We're not going to give the enemy equipment. I can't get our collaborators in this war to give equipment to the enemy, but money, yes, we can make some deal. I said, now how about these men, Eichmann and the men around him? Can't we do some bribery? Were they approachable? And Brandt looked at me and said, are you kidding? Talked English. He had worked in Brooklyn some years back as a young man and talked some English. Are you kidding? He said, they can all be bought. You are dealing, you're dealing with men of the lowest character. You're dealing with bandits.
When it was unsuccessful in the East, which plans, I think, which would get people out through Romania and onto boats in the Black Sea and out of Europe, it moved westward.
The talks were switched to Switzerland because the British would not permit any deal to be made.
Well, I really only saw Becker, who represented the Nazi, a wing of the SS in Hungary. It was not directly the extermination wing, but an economic wing of the SS, whom he led us to believe had convinced Himmler that trying to get something out of the Allies, the Americans in particular, in return for stopping the Jewish deportations was worth undertaking.
We learned through Switzerland that you could possibly get into some negotiations with some of the top Germans because at that time the war was beginning to have a predictable end. So very carefully we negotiated.
Washington took a very nervous view, not to speak of the view that the British and let alone the Russians took of any such talks going on, that they should not be conducted directly in the name of the United States, because, of course, what the Nazis were after were goods, material, money in return for the release of people, which was a ransom negotiation, which none of us could enter into with any enthusiasm.
There was an elderly Jewish merchant named Sally Meyer in Switzerland who was very highly regarded and who was very helpful in these negotiations.
Poor Sally really had no cards in his hand.
Money?
Except at the very end we succeeded in getting $5 million transferred to an account in the Swiss National Bank in Zurich, which was in Sally's and my name, which was so tied down we never could have used it actually, although the Nazis on at least 2 and possibly 3 occasions turned up on the border at St. Margarethen with a satchel to put the money into.
The most strongest argument of Weissmandl that I know of, that he told, what do you risk? Even if your money will get lost, you lost practically nothing. You lost money that can always be recovered, can always be gained again. We are losing, our stake is our very lives.
One suggestion was that we supply trucks to the Germans in exchange for their letting people out. We, of course, had no intention of supplying trucks under any circumstance, or money. But the negotiations, we felt, would, at best, delay what was going on.
When I was informed first about the Joel Brandt story by Stettinius, was at that time Secretary of State, I was the only one to whom he showed the original cable, and I advised him to accept the German offer and to drag on, because 3,000 trucks, I think that was the number the Germans asked for, cannot be delivered in 1 week. It's not like you go into a shop and you buy a herring. So I said the war is already in this final stage, drag it on.
I'm sure Washington didn't want it to come out that some American official representing the War Refugee Board was negotiating with the Nazis for ransom.
And some deal was made with Eichmann.
He wanted money for the Jews.
Huh?
He wanted money. Hitler wanted money for the Jews.
That's it.
Yeah, he wanted to say,
Yeah, every Jew $1,000.
But there wasn't so much on to the United States. We wasn't so much worth to them.
And so these negotiations went on with the State Department approval. They never ended in any agreement. And we had to be very careful because the Russians were very suspicious of any negotiations with the Germans.
I've always thought if we had a tenth of the resources the OSS had, we could have done a lot of things.
Ridden with all the worst diseases known to mankind, and without medical attention or food enough to keep them alive, the prisoners died daily by the hundreds after rescue, despite any aid we could give them. American officers rounded up civilians and forced them to atone, in a small degree, for what their countrymen had done. Protesting, with the stench of death in their nostrils, they were forced to remove the victims to a hillside grave for better burial. For the first time, America can believe what they thought was impossible propaganda. Here is documentary evidence of sheer mass murder. Murder that will blacken the name of Germany for the rest of recorded history.
Your question whether the Jews could have been saved, obviously not. Jews could have been saved. The proof is very simple. As the whole horror was over, hundreds of thousands of Jews survived. If we, the Jews, would have done our job better, if even we on the committee did our job better, I mean, we tried our utmost, but obviously we could have done more. If the Jewish leadership would have acted, if the Jews would have acted, the number of the survivors could have been double, triple, fourfold. I don't want to make conjecture, but I think it's important to know that the number of people who survived was up to us, and if it was so small, it was the inadequacy of our activities. And if I were a Jewish leader, dead, I'd probably turning in grave, and if I was alive, I would have a very guilty conscience.
Finally, about what you did, do you feel that, in other words, when you were doing it, you said you knew what was going on, you knew the pressure. After the war, when you saw the pictures or whatever, what were your feelings then?
The feelings of any civilized human being that it's hard to believe that such things could happen.
And about the work you did in relation to that?
Little enough. Little enough. Late and little, I would say.